Imagine you're deep in the Wisconsin woods, miles from civilization. You hear a child crying for help just outside your cabin, but when you look inside, that same child is fast asleep in his bunk. This was the beginning of the nightmare for Jake at Camp Clearwater. It wasn't just a ghost, and it wasn't a prank. Something in those woods was watching, learning, and practicing. It wore his friend's yellow rain jacket. It mirrored his own face through the window, but with eyes too far apart and a melted grin. And just as Jake was about to run for his life, the thing whispered in his own voice, "You're leaving so soon, Jake? But we were just starting to sound like you." This is the full, terrifying account of the shadow at Camp Clearwater. If you think you're alone in the woods, you're wrong. It's already learning your voice.
This isn't a story about a ghost, and it's not a campfire legend designed to make kids check under their bunks. It's about what happened to Jake during the summer of 2023. Jake is my cousin, a guy who grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, played varsity football, and was about as normal as they come. He took a job as a senior counselor at Camp Clearwater, a prestigious summer camp tucked deep in the dense forests of northern Wisconsin. The camp was famous for its total wilderness immersion program. No phones, no electricity in the cabins, just the lake, the pines, and the stars. Jake loved it for the first month. He was in charge of a group of 12-year-old boys in Coyote Cabin, the cabin situated furthest from the main lodge, right on the edge of what the locals called the Dark Stand, a patch of old-growth forest that was so thick the sunlight barely hit the forest floor. The first signs, July 12th. It began on a Tuesday night. Jake was doing his final rounds, making sure the fire was completely extinguished and his campers were asleep. The woods in Wisconsin are never truly silent. There's the hum of cicadas and the occasional rustle of a deer. But that night, the forest went dead. No wind, no bugs, nothing. As Jake walked back to his own small counselor's shack, he heard a sound coming from the Dark Stand. It was the sound of a child crying, not a loud, panicked scream, but a soft, rhythmic sobbing, like someone was sitting at the base of a tree just out of sight. Jake, thinking one of his campers, Caleb, had snuck out and gotten lost, grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and headed toward the noise. "Caleb, is that you, buddy?" Jake called out. The sobbing stopped instantly. There was a pause, and then a small, trembling voice replied from the darkness. "Jake, I'm over here. I tripped. My leg. It's stuck." Jake hurried toward the voice. He pushed through the thick brush, his light cutting through the fog. But as he got closer to where the voice had come from, the voice seemed to move. It was always just 10 feet further into the shadows. "Caleb, stay still! I'm coming to you!" Jake shouted. The voice replied, but this time it sounded slightly different. The pitch was right, but the pacing was off, too mechanical. "I am staying still, Jake. Help me." Jake stopped. A cold realization hit him. He turned his flashlight back toward Coyote Cabin and sprinted. He burst through the door and did a head count. All the boys, including Caleb, were fast asleep in their bunks. Caleb was even snoring loudly. Jake locked the cabin door from the inside, something he wasn't supposed to do, and stayed awake with a hatchet in his hand until the sun rose. The night of the fire, July 15th. 3 nights later, the atmosphere at the camp had shifted. The other counselors, Ryan and Sarah, started complaining about pranks. Someone was leaving piles of dead birds on their doorsteps. Someone was tapping on their windows at 3 a.m. That night, the camp held a massive bonfire by the lake. Everyone was there, singing and roasting marshmallows. Jake was sitting with Ryan when he looked across the fire, through the orange flames and smoke, toward the tree line.
There, standing just at the edge of the light, was a figure. At first, Jake thought it was another counselor. It looked like Sarah. It was wearing her bright yellow rain jacket and had her long blonde hair. But Sarah was sitting right next to the lake, 50 yards away, laughing with the campers. Jake watched the figure in the yellow jacket. It wasn't moving. It was just staring at the group with an intensity that felt predatory. Jake nudged Ryan and pointed. As soon as his finger moved, the figure in the yellow jacket didn't run away. It unfolded. Its torso seemed to stretch upwards, and its legs became impossibly thin. It dropped to all fours and sprinted back into the dark stand with a speed that no human could ever achieve. It didn't make a sound as it ran, no leaves crunching, no branches snapping. It was like a shadow moving through shadows. The final encounter. The breaking point came on Jake's last night at the camp. He had already submitted his resignation, claiming a family emergency. He was packing his bags in the counselor's shack when he heard a knock on his window. Tap, tap, tap. He looked up. Pressed against the glass was a face. It looked like his own face, the same jawline, the same nose, but the proportions were melted. The eyes were too far apart, and the mouth was just a jagged, lipless horizontal slit. The thing outside didn't try to break the glass. It just leaned in close, its breath fogging the window, and spoke in Jake's own voice. "You're leaving so soon, Jake, but we were just starting to sound like you." Then it began to laugh, but the laugh didn't stop. It started as Jake's laugh, then shifted into Ryan's deep chuckle, then Sarah's high-pitched giggle, then the crying of the Caleb voice from the woods, all layered on top of each other in a horrifying, dissonant chorus. Jake didn't look back. He grabbed his keys, ran to his truck, and drove through the camp gates, snapping the wooden security arm in his haste. He didn't stop until he reached a bright 24-hour gas station 3 towns away. He never went back for the rest of his gear. He told the camp director that a bear had been stalking his cabin, but he knows the truth. He knows that something is still up there in the dark stand, wearing a yellow rain jacket and practicing the voices of the people who are brave or foolish enough to visit. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. October in Colorado gets cold fast, especially up in the mountains where I'd been living since my divorce finalized earlier that year. I'd moved to Granite Falls after signing the papers in August. 33 and starting fresh seemed less pathetic in a place where nobody knew my history.
The town had maybe 4,000 people tucked between peaks that already had snow on them, and I'd rented a cabin about 20 minutes outside the main strip. That Saturday morning, I'd signed up for a trail cleanup event at Bear Creek Trail, one of those community service things I figured would help me meet people who weren't just the cashier at the grocery store or my landlord. The email from the Parks Department said to meet at 8 in the morning at the main trailhead. Bring work gloves if you had them, and they'd provide trash bags and those grabber stick things. I pulled into the gravel parking area around 4 to 8, counting maybe 15 cars already there. The volunteers stood in a loose circle near the information board, most of them wearing worn hiking boots and flannel jackets, holding steaming cups from their thermoses. I recognized a few faces from town: the woman who ran the bakery, a couple of guys I'd seen at the hardware store, an older man who walked his German shepherd past my cabin sometimes. Everyone seemed to already know each other, laughing about something someone's kid had done at the school play, discussing whether we'd get early snow this year. I stood at the edge of the group, pulling my work gloves from my jacket pocket, trying to look busy while actually feeling completely out of place. That's when this guy approached me, probably mid-40s, wearing a bright orange vest like the ones road workers use, carrying a clipboard and giving me this huge welcoming grin that made his whole face crinkle up. "First time volunteering with us?" he asked, and I nodded, grateful someone was actually talking to me. He introduced himself as Nathan, said he'd been organizing these cleanups for about 2 years, really passionate about keeping the trails beautiful for everyone. He had this way of talking where he'd lean in slightly, like whatever you were saying was the most interesting thing he'd heard all day, and he kept touching my elbow when he'd point out different trail sections on the map he pulled from his clipboard. Nathan explained we'd be split into groups of 4 or 5, each taking a different section of the trail system, and that he'd make sure to put me with some friendly folks since I was new. The weird thing was, when the actual Parks Department coordinator showed up, a woman named Carol, wearing an official uniform with the Colorado Parks logo, Nathan just kept standing there next to me, still holding his clipboard, still wearing that orange vest that I noticed didn't have any official logos or badges on it.
Carol gathered everyone together and started explaining the day's plan, pretty much repeating everything Nathan had already told me, except she divided us into groups of 3, not 4 or 5. She assigned me to work with the bakery owner, Janet, and her husband, Tom, pointing out that we'd be taking the lower loop near the river. Nathan wasn't on her list at all, but he just nodded along like he knew exactly what was happening, then told Carol he'd float between groups to help where needed, and she seemed fine with that, though I caught her giving him this quick look I couldn't quite read. We grabbed our supplies, trash bags, those grabber things, a bucket for any broken glass, and headed out onto the trail. Janet chatting away about how they'd been doing these cleanups since they moved here in 2009, asking me about my cabin, whether I'd survived my first real mountain thunderstorm yet. All this normal, small-town friendly stuff that was actually starting to make me feel welcome. About an hour into the cleanup, we'd filled 2 bags with the usual stuff: energy bar wrappers, water bottles, cigarette butts, even a busted camping chair someone had just left behind. Tom was telling this story about finding a whole tent full of empty beer cans last year when Nathan appeared on the trail ahead of us, coming from the direction we were heading rather than from behind where the other groups were working. He waved us over, said he'd spotted what looked like a major dump site just off the trail, maybe 50 feet through the trees, too much for one person to handle alone. Janet immediately said we should get Carol. That dump site sometimes had hazardous stuff, but Nathan insisted it was just regular trash, probably from some college kids having a party, nothing dangerous, and he'd already started bagging it up, but needed extra hands. Tom checked his watch and mentioned we should probably take our break anyway. Carol had said to meet back at the parking area at 10:30 for water and snacks, and it was already past 10. Nathan jumped on that immediately, his whole face lighting up like Tom had just given him the best idea. "Hey, if you're heading back for break anyway, I can show you a shortcut," he said, looking directly at me, even though he was supposedly talking to all three of us. "There's an old service road that cuts straight back to the parking lot. Saves you probably 15 minutes versus going back the way we came. I use it all the time when I'm out here doing my own cleanup work." Janet started to say something about sticking to the marked trails, but Nathan was already pointing through the trees to the left, explaining how the old road connected to the back end of the parking area, right where the portable toilets were set up, and we could grab our snacks and be back before anyone even noticed we'd taken a different route. The way he kept focusing on me while he talked, like Janet and Tom weren't even there, made my chest feel tight in this way I tried to ignore. I told myself I was just being paranoid because I'd been alone too much lately. Tom actually seemed interested in the shortcut, started asking Nathan about whether it was the same service road they'd used to bring in equipment when they rebuilt the footbridge last spring. But Janet grabbed her husband's arm, said something about her knee acting up and needing to take the easier path back, the one they knew. Nathan's expression flickered for just a second, this flash of irritation that made him look completely different from the friendly volunteer helper he'd been playing all morning, before the big smile came back. He turned to me then, completely turned his back on Janet and Tom, and asked if I wanted to see the shortcut anyway. Said he could show me real quick while they headed back the long way, and we'd probably still beat them to the parking area. "Always good to know multiple routes," he said, already taking a few steps toward the trees, especially for someone new to the area. "These trails can get confusing if you don't know all the little connections." I actually took a step toward him. Even now, writing this, I can't believe I actually took that step, started to follow this stranger into the woods just because I didn't want to seem rude or unfriendly. But Janet spoke up louder this time, almost sharp, saying, "She's with our group, Nathan. Carol assigned the groups for a reason." The way she said his name, with this edge to it, made me stop and really look at her face. Her expression was pleasant enough, still smiling, but her eyes were locked on Nathan with this intensity that made me suddenly very aware that we were pretty far from the parking area, pretty far from the other groups, and that nobody except Janet and Tom actually knew where I was right then. Nathan laughed, this easy, casual sound that didn't match the way his jaw had tensed up, and said sure, of course, he was just trying to be helpful, share some local knowledge with a newcomer. We started walking back the way we'd come, Janet keeping me between her and Tom, Nathan trailing behind us for a while, before eventually disappearing off to the side, supposedly to check on another group. Janet kept up this steady stream of chatter about her bakery, asking me if I'd tried her sourdough yet, telling me about the farmer's market on Saturdays. Normal stuff, but her hand stayed on my arm the whole walk back, gentle but firm, like she was making sure I stayed with them. When we got to the parking area, most of the other groups were already there, Carol passing out bottled water and granola bars from a cooler in her truck. I grabbed my water and walked over to thank Janet for showing me the ropes, and that's when she pulled me aside, glanced around to make sure nobody was close enough to hear, and asked me in this low, careful voice if Nathan had approached me before today, if I'd seen him around town, if he'd maybe been to my cabin. The question made my whole body go cold in this visceral way that finally broke through my social programming. I told her no, I'd never seen him before this morning, and asked what was going on, why she was asking. Janet exchanged this look with Tom, one of those married couple conversations that happens without words, before she told me that Nathan had been showing up to these cleanup events for about 6 months.
Always had some reason to be there, but was never officially on the volunteer list. And 3 times now, young women who joined the groups had mentioned him, making them uncomfortable, trying to separate them from others, offering to show them shortcuts or special spots along the trails. Carol had tried to tell him he needed to register properly if he wanted to volunteer, but he always had some excuse, some reason he was just passing through, just helping out. And since he'd never actually done anything they could report, they couldn't exactly ban him from public trails. I looked around the parking area then, scanning the groups of volunteers who were getting ready to head back out after break, but I didn't see Nathan anywhere. Neither did Janet when I asked her, and that seemed to worry her more than anything else. She grabbed Carol, pulled her over, and quickly explained that Nathan had tried to get me alone on some shortcut trail, and now he'd disappeared. Carol's face went tight, and she immediately did a head count, checking her clipboard against the people standing around, asking each group if everyone was accounted for. That's when we realized Melissa was missing. A young woman from Fort Collins who'd driven up for the event, probably 25 or 26, auburn hair in a ponytail, wearing a Colorado State University sweatshirt. She'd been working with the group on the upper trail, and her team leader said she'd mentioned needing to use the bathroom about 40 minutes ago, headed back toward the parking area where the portable toilets were, and they'd assumed she'd just gone straight to break afterward. Carol called Melissa's phone immediately, and we could all hear it ringing somewhere nearby, this cheerful pop song ringtone echoing from the woods behind the portable toilets, exactly where Nathan had said his shortcut came out. Tom and 2 other guys jogged over to look while Carol called 911, and they found the phone about 30 feet into the trees, lying in the dirt next to a dropped water bottle and 1 work glove. The screen was cracked, but still working, and when Carol picked it up with a tissue to preserve any fingerprints, we could all see the text message that was typed but never sent, just sitting there in the message field. He's not part of the team. The timestamp showed she'd started typing it 28 minutes ago. The police arrived within 15 minutes, benefits of a small town where nothing much happens, and they immediately started searching the woods, brought in dogs within the hour. But Melissa and Nathan were both gone. Just gone, like they'd never existed, except for that phone and that unsent warning that she'd tried to give someone, probably her friend who was supposed to pick her up later, before Nathan had stopped her from hitting send. The search went on for 3 days. They found Nathan's orange vest snagged on a branch near the river crossing, about 2 miles from the trail, and Melissa's other glove further downstream, but nothing else. The police discovered Nathan's truck parked at a different trailhead 5 miles away, one that connected to the same trail system through those old service roads he'd mentioned. Inside, they found maps of the entire trail network with handwritten notes about quiet spots and low traffic times, plus a notebook with descriptions of various women who'd attended previous cleanup events, hair color, approximate age, whether they'd come alone, which cars they'd driven. My description was in there from that morning. New, divorced, cabin off Forest Road 7, white Subaru, isolated. The FBI got involved after that, connected Nathan to similar disappearances in Wyoming and Montana, always at volunteer trail events, always targeting women who were new to the area, always vanishing without a trace afterward. They never found Melissa. Her parents came down from Nebraska, stayed in town for 2 weeks, put up posters everywhere. But eventually, they had to go home with nothing but questions. The theory was that Nathan had some kind of hideout in the backcountry, maybe an old mining cabin or cave system, somewhere he could disappear to when things got hot. The police searched every structure in a 20-mile radius, used helicopters with thermal imaging, brought in cave specialists to check the old mines. But the mountains up here are vast and full of places where someone who knows the terrain could hide forever. What haunts me most is thinking about those 40 minutes between when Melissa left her group and when we realized she was gone. She must have run into Nathan near the toilets, maybe recognized him from the morning meeting, thought he was safe because he was wearing that official-looking vest, and followed him just far enough into the trees for him to reveal who he really was, just like I almost did. Except I had Janet watching out for me, and Melissa had nobody. I moved out of Granite Falls 2 months later, not because anyone blamed me or treated me differently, but because I couldn't drive past that trailhead without thinking about how close I'd come. Couldn't see the mountains without wondering if Nathan was still up there somewhere, watching, waiting for things to calm down so he could come back with a different name, different vest, same friendly smile. Janet helped me pack, and on my last day, she told me something that still gives me nightmares. About a month before the cleanup event, she'd seen Nathan at the grocery store, standing near the community bulletin board where I'd pinned a note about looking for hiking buddies since I was new to town. He'd been taking a photo of it with his phone. She hadn't thought anything of it at the time, just figured he was interested in hiking too. But now she wondered if that's how he'd known to target me, if he'd been planning it for weeks, researching where I lived, when I'd be alone, how isolated my cabin was. The FBI agent I spoke with before leaving said they'd linked Nathan to at least 7 disappearances across 3 states over 4 years, always the same pattern, always women who were new to the area or visiting, always at organized outdoor events where he could blend in as a helpful volunteer. They never caught him. Sometimes I check the news from Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana looking for reports of missing hikers, and every time I see one, I wonder if it's him with a new name, new vest, new hunting ground. But what really keeps me up at night is knowing that I survived purely by chance because Janet happened to be protective, because Tom happened to mention the break at the right moment, because something in Janet's voice made me stop walking toward those trees. Melissa probably had those same instincts, probably felt that same chest-tightening worry, but she didn't have a Janet, and that text she tried to send, "He's not part of the team," was her trying to be her own warning system, trying to protect herself, or maybe warn others. And it wasn't enough. It's never enough when they know the terrain better than you.
My friend Ben just replaced every solid door in his house with glass. Not for the aesthetic, but because he's terrified of who or what might be standing on the other side, talking to him in his own voice. He learned the hard way that in the Catskill Mountains, the thing knocking at your door doesn't want to come in. It wants to replace you. Ben is a technical writer. He deals in cold, hard logic. He's the last person on Earth to believe in skinwalkers. But after 48 hours at Blackwood Cabin, logic wasn't enough to save him. He thought he was being pranked when he heard his own secret knock at 1 a.m. He thought it was a recording when a voice that sounded exactly like his asked to be let in. But when he saw the thing wearing his favorite flannel shirt with a face that looked like an unfinished slab of clay, he realized the woods aren't just empty trees. They are a mirror, and if you stay long enough, the mirror starts to walk on its own. I'm telling this story because Ben won't. We've been friends since college, and he's the most grounded, cynical guy I know. He's a freelance technical writer, someone who deals in facts, logic, and manuals. He's not prone to exaggeration, and he certainly doesn't believe in the supernatural. But since October of 2024, something in him has broken. He won't even go into his own backyard after dark anymore, and he's replaced all the interior doors in his house with glass ones. It started when Ben rented a cabin in a remote part of the Catskill Mountains in New York. He was working on a massive project and needed a week of deep work away from the distractions of the city. The place was isolated, miles from the nearest paved road, sitting at the end of a long, winding gravel driveway known locally as Gray Rock Road. The cabin was beautiful in a rugged way: old timber, heavy stone, and large windows that looked out into a forest so thick that even at noon the ground was draped in shadows. The owner was a local man named Mr. Miller. He was a quiet, weathered man who looked like he'd been carved out of the very trees that surrounded the property. When he handed Ben the keys on that Monday afternoon, he didn't give him the usual tour of the amenities. He didn't talk about the Wi-Fi or the heating. He just stood on the porch, his eyes fixed on the tree line, and said one thing in a voice that was as dry as dead leaves. "The mountain has a long memory, son. People from the city like to think the woods are empty, but they aren't. If you hear a knock after the sun goes down, don't ask who's there. Don't go to the window. Just wait. If they don't speak by the third knock, you keep that door barred until the sun comes up. No matter what you hear, you stay inside." Ben nodded and smiled, thinking it was just a bit of local flavor, one of those stories locals tell to make the rental feel authentic or spooky for tourists. He thanked Miller, unpacked his gear, and set up his workstation by the large window. For the first few hours, it was perfect. The air was crisp, the smell of pine was overwhelming, and the silence was absolute.
The first day was incredibly productive. Ben worked late into the evening, fueled by coffee and the rhythmic tapping of his keyboard. By 10 p.m., the forest outside had turned into a wall of solid black. It wasn't a peaceful silence anymore. It felt heavy, as if the woods were leaning in, listening. Around midnight, Ben was finishing a difficult chapter when he heard it. Knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp, deliberate raps on the heavy oak front door. Ben froze. He looked at his watch, then back at the door. He wasn't expecting anyone, and he was miles from the nearest neighbor. He thought maybe it was Miller coming back to check on something, but why would he arrive at midnight? Ben walked to the door and looked through the small brass peephole. The porch light, which he had left on, was out. The darkness on the other side was so thick it felt physical. He couldn't see a shape, a shadow, or even the railing of the porch. Remembering Miller's warning and feeling a sudden irrational surge of fear, Ben didn't ask who's there. He just stood there, holding his breath. Then came a sound that made the hair on his neck stand up. a slow, wet sliding sound against the wood of the door, as if something damp was being dragged across the surface. This was followed by a heavy, rattling exhale. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded like a person trying to breathe through a throat full of fluid. It was inches away from his face, separated only by 2 inches of oak. Ben didn't move. He didn't speak. He retreated to the kitchen, grabbed the largest knife he could find, and sat on the floor with his back against the refrigerator until the sun finally rose. The next morning, the forest looked normal again. Ben checked the porch. The porch bulb hadn't burned out. It had been unscrewed just enough to break the connection. There were no footprints in the gravel, but the front door was covered in faint, greasy streaks, like something with oily skin had been rubbing against it. Ben tried to convince himself it was a bear, or perhaps a local teenager pulling a prank. He was a logical man, and logic demanded a rational explanation. To prove to himself that he wasn't losing his mind, he set up his laptop on the dining table, facing the front door, and kept his phone's camera ready. He told himself he would record the prankster and call the police in the morning. At 1:15 a.m., the knocking returned. But this time, it wasn't a heavy rhythmic knock. It was a soft, playful rhythm, the exact 4-beat pattern Ben uses when he knocks on my apartment door back in the city. A secret knock only he and I know. Ben felt the blood drain from his face. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. Then a voice came through the wood. "Ben? Hey man, it's cold out here. Let me in." Ben stopped breathing. It was his own voice. It wasn't just a recording. It was his exact tone, his specific way of shortening his sentences, and that slight rasp he gets in his throat when he's tired. It was a perfect, terrifying duplicate. "Who are you?" Ben yelled, his voice cracking as he clutched the kitchen knife. "It's me, Ben," the voice replied from the other side of the door. It sounded so casual, so normal. "I forgot my charger in the car, and the door locked behind me. Just open up, man. Don't be weird." Ben backed away, his legs shaking. He could hear the gravel on the porch crunching as something moved back and forth. He realized then that the thing outside wasn't just talking, it was practicing. He heard it whisper the word charger over and over, changing the emphasis each time, testing the vowels until it sounded indistinguishable from his own speech. Then the tone shifted, the casualness vanished, the voice became deep, guttural, and distorted, yet it still carried the echo of his own voice. "Open the door, Ben." The handle of the door began to jiggle, slowly at first, then violently, as if someone or something was throwing their entire weight against it. Ben fled to the bedroom, locked the door, and pushed the heavy dresser against it. He spent the rest of the night in the closet, praying for dawn. Ben didn't wait for the sun to fully clear the mountains. As soon as the first gray light of dawn touched the tops of the trees, he threw his laptop and a few clothes into his bag and sprinted for his car. He didn't even stop to lock the cabin door. As he was speeding down the long, bumpy driveway, he saw Mr. Miller standing by the mailbox at the intersection with the main road. Miller didn't wave, and he didn't look surprised to see Ben fleeing in the middle of the week. He just stood there, lean and grim, pointing a trembling finger back toward the cabin. Ben looked in his rearview mirror, and what he saw is the reason he hasn't been the same since. Standing on the porch of the cabin was a figure. It was wearing Ben's exact blue flannel shirt, the same one Ben was currently wearing. The figure was tall, but its proportions were subtly wrong. Its limbs were slightly too long, its elbows bending at angles that looked physically impossible. It didn't have a face, not really. It was just a smooth, pale surface where features should be, like a sculpture that had been abandoned before the artist could finish it. As Ben accelerated onto the main road, the figure didn't chase him. It simply stood there on the porch, raised a hand, and waved, using the exact awkward half-wave that Ben has used his entire life. Ben doesn't rent cabins anymore. He doesn't go to the mountains. In fact, he rarely leaves the city. He lives in a high-rise apartment with 24-hour security and glass doors on every room because he needs to see what's on the other side. But every now and then, in the dead of night, he'll hear a 3-beat knock on his front door. And he knows better than to ask who's there.
Some people have some pretty strange triggers. Back when she still used Twitter, she'd often see people posting lists of things that supposedly triggered them. Stuff like Fall Guys, baked beans, happiness, or even Dream, the Minecraft YouTuber. At the time, she'd roll her eyes and think, come on, how do these people even function if they're getting triggered by tiny bean-shaped game characters? But that was before she developed severe PTSD from Elvis Presley. Yeah, the king himself. Now she laughs when she says it, mostly to hide the pain, but it's true. If she stares at Elvis Presley for too long, or worse, at someone dressed like him, she turns into a sobbing, shaking mess. It all started one Halloween. She'd been invited to a party with a costume gimmick. The theme was Elvis. Entry was $5, unless you showed up dressed as Elvis, in which case you got in for free. She didn't have an Elvis costume, so she just paid the $5 and walked in. About half of the guests skipped the whole Elvis thing too, but that still left 30 or 40 cheap, shiny Elvis impersonators scattered around the house, and none of them had left the building. The place was packed way beyond what anyone expected. The party was being held in someone's house, and whoever owned it clearly hadn't realized how big of a draw the Elvis gimmick would be. The result? A crowd of wannabe kings, guys with plastic guitars, fake sideburns, blue suede shoes, and glittery white jumpsuits. Some of them were dancing awkwardly, some were trying to be sexy Elvis, and a few, both men and women, really took that idea a little too far. At one point, I even noticed a girl using her Elvis mask to hide her face while flashing people in the crowd. That was her cue to be grateful she came in simple jeans and a strappy top. Sometimes being boring paid off. She'd caught a ride with a friend who didn't drink, so she figured she could have a beer or two without worrying. She grabbed a red plastic cup from the keg, hoping it would take the edge off the chaotic atmosphere. Oh, and of course, as part of the Elvis theme, guess who was blasting non-stop on the stereo? Elvis. Naturally. No breaks, no silence, just jailhouse rock and hound dog looping endlessly on Spotify. After one drink, she was already regretting coming. But her friend really loved Elvis, so she stayed. When she went to grab her second drink, a short, wobbly female Elvis stumbled up to her and handed her a cup. "Suspicious minds," the woman mumbled, then staggered off before she could respond. Normally, she would never accept a drink from a stranger, but through the cheap sunglasses and wig, she recognized the girl as another friend from college. What she didn't realize was that her friend wasn't referencing the Elvis song Suspicious Minds. She was trying to warn her. She had been trying to say the drink was suspicious. Later that night, after everything that happened, she asked that friend why she'd handled it that way. Apparently, she'd been drunk, scared, and convinced some creepy Elvis guy was stalking her. She thought her drink might have been spiked and panicked, just passing it off to someone else. But at the time, she didn't know any of that, and being slightly buzzed and overwhelmed by the noise, lights, and constant Elvis everywhere, she just downed the drink. It didn't taste off. And she didn't think it was roofied. Unfortunately, she knew what that felt like because it had happened to her before. But there was definitely something in that drink. Within minutes, she started sweating, her head pounding, her stomach twisting. The room began to tilt just a little too much. She started scanning the crowd for a friend, trying to tell her she wasn't feeling right. That's when she saw him, the most realistic-looking Elvis at the party. He didn't wear a mask. His hair was perfectly styled in a pompadour, his skin glistened under the lights, and his rhinestone suit looked expensive. He wore those signature gold sunglasses. And there was only one person she knew who could look that much like Elvis. Her ex-boyfriend, Rodney. Her blood went cold. It couldn't be. Rodney was the guy she'd had to get a restraining order against, the same guy she suspected had roofied her once before, though she could never prove it. After the breakup, he had become obsessed. Fixated, as the police called it. And now there he was, standing across the room, dressed as Elvis. She knew it was him. He had that same baby face, the same dark hair, the same build. And then he did it. The gesture she could never forget. He pointed 2 fingers at his own eyes, then at her, silently mouthing, "I'm watching you." Her heart dropped. She pushed through the crowd, shoving away random Elvises left and right, desperate to find her friend. People yelled at her to watch it, but she didn't care. She could feel his eyes following her. When she looked back, there he was, moving through the party, slowly, steadily, like Michael Myers in a white jumpsuit and a chilling grin. She ducked into another room. The house suddenly felt endless. Too many rooms, too many people dressed exactly the same. It was like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Was it real? Or was whatever had been in that drink twisting her perception? She couldn't tell. All she knew was that she needed to get out. But every time she tried to move toward the exit, she'd see him again, always just behind her, still following. It felt like she was running in circles, trapped in a loop of identical faces and flashing lights. Eventually, she stumbled through a hallway and out the front door, gasping for air.
Music still blared from outside speakers, and even here, there were Elvises milling around the yard. Then she turned toward the house and froze. At the front door, under the yellow porch light, stood evil Elvis, Rodney. The smirk on his face was exactly the one she remembered, that smug, knowing grin that had haunted her since the night everything went wrong between them. And then, just like that, he moved. He jumped down the steps and charged straight at her. She screamed. Her legs gave out, collapsing beneath her as he tackled her to the grass. He grabbed her hair, clawed at her clothes. She didn't know what he planned to do, but she could feel his rage, his sick obsession pouring out of him. Rodney had always been a lunatic when he was high, and he was always high. Coke, pills, whatever he could find. But before things could get worse, someone else intervened. From the side, a massive Elvis, a huge guy in a padded white jumpsuit, came charging across the lawn. At first, she thought she was hallucinating because hamburger buns were literally sticking out of his pockets, but he was real. He slammed into evil Elvis with a thunderous tackle that sent both of them crashing to the ground. Later, she'd learned the guy was wearing a fat suit. His whole costume was late-stage Elvis. At that moment, though, she didn't care. She scrambled to her feet, shaking, nauseous, and immediately threw up on the grass. That, she would later realize, probably saved her life, purging whatever was in that drugged drink. Meanwhile, Fat Elvis was doing his best to stomp evil Elvis into the ground, but the bulky foam suit made it hard for him to move. Then, other Elvises started joining in. A chaotic, surreal brawl of white jumpsuits and fake sideburns exploded across the yard. Dozens of Elvis Presleys fighting under the porch light, a scene straight out of a fever dream. And then, evil Elvis managed to roll free. He reached into his jumpsuit, pulled out a gun. The crowd froze. He fired. The shot hit Fat Elvis square in the stomach. Fat Elvis stumbled back, fell hard onto the grass. Everyone around screamed and backed away, hands raised, the party instantly shattering into panic. Evil Elvis pointed the gun at the air, fired one more round, and vanished into the darkness beside the house.
Someone yelled to chase him, but she screamed for them not to. "He's armed," she yelled, her voice cracking. She told them she knew who he was, that they should just call the cops. The police showed up not long after the chaos died down. The guests were scattered, some crying, some half drunk, some still in shock from seeing an Elvis Presley impersonator pull a gun in the middle of a Halloween party. She was trembling as she gave her statement, her clothes torn, her hair a mess. All she could tell them was that her attacker, Evil Elvis as everyone was now calling him, was her ex-boyfriend, Rodney. She told the officers everything, about the restraining order, about how he'd drugged her before, about how he'd become obsessed with her after their breakup, showing up at her work, her apartment, sending messages from fake accounts. They wrote it all down, and one of the officers, a woman, gave her a long, grim look. Then she said something that didn't make sense. "Ma'am," the officer began carefully, "we've already got a man by that name in custody." She blinked. "What?" The officer went on. "Rodney was arrested yesterday for armed robbery at a convenience store in another state. He's been in jail for at least 24 hours. She just stared, shaking her head. "No," she said quietly. "That's not possible. I saw him. He was here." The officer even called the sheriff's department that had him in custody. They confirmed it. Rodney was still behind bars, no question. So whoever had chased her, whoever had attacked her, whoever had pointed that gun, it wasn't Rodney. But the resemblance was terrifying. He looked exactly like him. Same face, same build, even the same cocky smirk. When they later questioned Rodney about it, he seemed genuinely confused. He didn't even try to deny anything. He actually looked worried when they told him what happened, like he was hearing about some nightmare version of himself.
No one ever figured out who Evil Elvis really was. He'd vanished into the night and was never caught. A few days later, she got a call from the police. The fat Elvis who had tackled the gunman had survived. Turned out, the reason he wasn't killed by the bullet was because his costume, the oversized foam-padded fat suit, had absorbed the impact. Underneath all that padding and makeup, Fat Elvis was actually one of her old college friends. He'd been playing the Final Days Elvis as a joke, complete with fake sweat and cheeseburger props. That ridiculous costume ended up saving his life. She wasn't so lucky emotionally. Even though she was physically fine, something in her broke that night. From then on, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, became a living nightmare to her. She couldn't look at his face, couldn't hear his voice. Even the opening notes of Can't Help Falling in Love made her stomach twist and her hands shake. And whenever she saw an Elvis impersonator, whether on TV, on the street, or at some random event, she'd freeze up completely, heart pounding, waiting for him to do that gesture. 2 fingers to the eyes, then pointing at her. "I'm watching you." She'd try to tell herself it was just trauma, that her brain was playing tricks on her, trying to make sense of what happened. But deep down, she could never shake the feeling that maybe, somehow, Rodney hadn't been lying behind bars that night. Maybe it really had been him, or something that looked just like him. To this day, she keeps an eye on local news stories, scanning for anything mentioning an Elvis impersonator committing violent crimes. But nothing ever comes up. No suspects. No similar cases. It's like the man just disappeared. And so she tries to move on, but the memories never fade. That night replays in her mind every time she hears the king's voice, every time she catches a glimpse of that white rhinestone suit. She's haunted by the sound of 1,000 Elvis songs echoing through a crowded house, by the flashing lights, the smell of beer and sweat, and the weight of a man who shouldn't have been there, pressing her into the grass. She tells people she's fine now, that she just doesn't like Elvis, but deep down, she knows the truth, that somewhere out there, maybe still wearing that white jumpsuit and gold sunglasses, evil Elvis never really left the building. The werewolf on the couch. A couple of years after the Elvis incident,
Another story made its way around her college friend group, and it was the kind that stuck with her. A friend of a friend had thrown a small Halloween house party. Nothing wild, just a few decorations, a bowl of punch, apple bobbing, and cheap vodka. When they arrived, the first thing everyone noticed was the werewolf sitting dead center on the couch. At first, they thought it was a decoration. The mask looked that real. The snout glistened, the fur looked authentic, and the eyes, man, those eyes looked alive. The werewolf was wearing a Hawaiian shirt and a pair of chinos, with skinny legs sticking out and dirty sneakers on his feet. He even had tattoos on his arms that looked like prison ink, though most assumed they were drawn on for the costume. He didn't talk, didn't move much either. When people sat near him, he'd occasionally let out this low, wheezing growl, just enough to make them uncomfortable. Everyone figured it was just some guy staying in character, and after a while, they decided it had to be Josh, one of their friends known for pulling weird Halloween stunts. The year before, Josh had dressed as a mannequin and stood silently in the corner for an hour before suddenly moving and scaring everyone half to death. So they figured, okay, the werewolf must be him this time. They left him alone, waiting for his big reveal. Then, just before midnight, the front door burst open, and there was Josh, dressed as Leatherface, swinging a plastic chainsaw. He apologized for being late, said his car wouldn't start. Everyone froze. If Josh was there, then who the hell was sitting on the couch? They looked back at the werewolf. He hadn't moved. Josh walked up to him, trying to break the tension. He said, "Buddy, say something. Who are you?" No reply. Josh reached forward and pulled off the werewolf mask, and the whole room erupted in screams. The face underneath was gray, slack. Yellow bile dripped from the corner of his mouth. His glassy eyes stared blankly into nothing. He was dead. Total chaos followed. Someone called 911, while others stumbled out of the house, crying or throwing up. When the police arrived, they quickly ruled everyone out. The autopsy later showed the man had overdosed, a massive mix of drugs in his system. He wasn't invited to the party. Nobody knew him. He was just a homeless man in his 40s who'd apparently wandered in, sat down on the couch, and quietly died. The police couldn't even find his identity. No ID, no family, no records. In the end, only a few of the partygoers showed up to his tiny, state-funded funeral. And for some reason, even though she'd never met him, that story haunted her. The thought of a stranger putting on a hyper-realistic werewolf mask, stumbling into a random party, and dying among people who thought he was just part of the act, it stuck with her. Sometimes, late at night, she'd think about him, about how he'd chosen that mask, that night, that room full of laughter and noise. Maybe he wanted to die around people, to feel like he belonged one last time. Or maybe he just wanted to go out as someone else entirely. Either way, she hoped that wherever he was now, he'd finally found peace. Maybe he was up there somewhere, living his best afterlife, howling at the moon.
"12 years old. That was my age when this happened, over a decade ago. I lived in a small Oklahoma town, one of those quiet places where the houses sit far apart, swallowed by thick woods that always felt darker than they should. Even in daylight, you could swear something was watching. It was supposed to be a normal school day. My grandma dropped me off around 3 p.m. This was the first year I stayed home alone after school. Usually, my parents showed up around 4:30. No big deal. But not today. My dad wouldn't be home until 7. My mom, because of parent-teacher conferences, wouldn't be home until 8. Plenty of daylight left, or so I thought. I ran upstairs, turned on my Xbox 360, and hopped into Minecraft with my friend Seth. We'd been playing for about 2 hours when I heard it. A car door closing in my driveway. I froze. No one should have been there. Still holding my controller, mic on, I walked to the upstairs window that overlooked the driveway, half expecting it to be my dad. But what I saw instead was a red truck. One I had never seen before. It pulled in sideways, like the driver owned the property. A man stepped out wearing a hat, a big camo hoodie and jeans. In September, in Oklahoma, way too heavy for the weather. He moved quickly, already heading toward my front door before my brain caught up. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Seconds later, knock, knock. I slid to another window with a better view. He was walking back down the walkway. For a moment, relief washed over me. But then, he didn't return to his truck. He walked right past it, straight to the garage side door. And he tried the handle. My heart sank so fast it hurt. "Seth," I whispered, voice shaking. "He's trying to get into my house." 5 p.m. Broad daylight. Someone trying to break in. Thank God the garage door was locked. But he didn't stop. He headed toward the back of the house. I dropped my headset, legs shaking as I crept downstairs, moving as quietly as I ever moved in my life. I hid behind the wall near the living room, out of sight of all the windows. Then I heard it. The back door handle turning, slowly, carefully, and then thud. A heavy sound, a purposeful sound, like metal hitting concrete or a tool dropping into place. My chest tightened until it felt like my ribs would crack. I wanted to call my parents, my grandma, anyone, but the only phone was in the kitchen. If I stepped into that room, he'd see me through the windows. I stayed frozen, listening, waiting. Silence. I forced myself to peek around the corner. He was gone. I bolted upstairs, grabbed my mic. "Seth, he tried the back door. He tried it. He's looking for a way in." Then, a car door slammed. I rushed to the window. The man finally climbed into his truck. Only then did I notice what he had in the truck bed. A crowbar and a shovel. He didn't drive off immediately. He just sat there, watching the house, thinking. It felt like an eternity before he finally backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the road. Only when the truck was completely gone did I go downstairs to check. What I found made my skin crawl. The back doormat was moved. The big plant pots were shifted aside. He was searching for a hidden key. We actually kept one there, but it was under a smaller pot he didn't check. The front porch pots were moved too. If he had found the key, if he had walked inside, I still don't let myself finish that thought. When my dad got home, he called the police. I gave them every detail. The man in the red truck never came back. But to this day, Whenever I hear a car door outside, my heart still stops. Just a little. Like I'm 12 years old again, standing behind that wall, listening to someone try every door in my house.
About 3 days ago, while my mom had gone to meet my grandparents abroad, my brother decided to celebrate his summer freedom. He went to the local market and picked up a bunch of bootleg PlayStation 2 games. We had our console chipped to play them since the originals were way too expensive. That night, we sat down to play one of the games. It was supposed to be Silent Hill 2, but when we popped in the disc, it wasn't a game at all. It was a DVD with some videos. My brother, our friend, and I decided to watch the first clip before returning it to the seller the next morning. The first video was 10 minutes of a deserted road, filmed late at night. A pair of young women appeared, clearly tipsy, wandering the neighborhood before entering a building. Then came the next clip. Two hands holding a lock-picking set tried opening a door. The lock clicked, and the door slowly swung open. We all froze. The camera crept into the house, moving shakily, panning across the living room, then heading toward a bedroom. Inside, a woman slept, one of the same tipsy girls from the previous clip. A hand holding a knife appeared on screen, gently tracing her cheek, then moving toward her throat. The breathing behind the camera was heavy, erratic. The video cut abruptly. We watched more clips, each one worse than the last, until the final video showed someone following my mom. She was wearing the same clothes she had on when she left for the airport 2 days ago. My heart sank. The DVD still had space. Whoever had made these videos might have already broken into our house. I panicked. I asked if we could stay at my brother's friend's house until Mom returned. I brought the DVD and set up an old laptop with a webcam in my bedroom, linked to my own laptop so I could watch remotely. That night, as I checked the webcam feed, I saw a shadow on the wall. A pop-up appeared. Someone was using the laptop at the same time and had plugged in a flash drive. I tried to shut it down, but the intruder opened a video. The footage showed me walking into my brother's friend's house with my luggage. Suddenly, the video minimized. On the webcam feed, a new message appeared above my bed. "You dare to keep what's mine. I will come to claim something of yours in return. You will bleed like I do." Right now, my brother, his friend, and I are locked in an upstairs bedroom. The intruder is moving around the house. The phone lines are cut, but we managed to call the police using my brother's cell phone. The DVD is still with me. Every second, the fear is unbearable.
If you made it this far, you're braver than most. If you enjoyed the story, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe for more nightmares. Trust me, the next one is darker,